Man, time flies by fast. It's been 15 years since the release of this game. I know, some of you are probably scratching your heads right now because Doom 2 was slightly older than 15 years. If the low-res footage isn't any indication, I'm not referring to the PC version of Doom 2. On October 29th, 2002, Doom 2 graced Nintendo's handheld, the Game Boy Advance, and I'm going to do my best job reviewing it. Gameplay-wise, it's surprisingly faithful to the original Doom 2, despite using a completely different engine tailored to the Game Boy Advance. This is in fact the Southpaw engine as opposed to id Tech 1. There are some noticeable changes, such as the pump shotgun having less of a spread, the chain gun firing in bursts of 1 and not 2. The super shotgun actually seems to reload a little bit faster. Chain gun sniping is pretty much impossible because the accuracy took a nosedive. The plasma rifle doesn't have a kickback when it shoots, the fist goes more slowly, the chainsaw actually pushes you back when you're using it so you have to fight against it, and boxes of rockets actually give you double the ammo they would on the PC version. I'd like to take this moment to thank the Doom Wikia for having this useful information on it. Despite these and apparently an armor glitch that causes the armor to stop protecting you once you enter a new map until you find some more of it, it's mostly intact. Surprisingly, the Arch Vial was added, which the PS1 version wasn't even grazed with because they didn't feel the system could do the monster justice. Probably the high memory associated with its graphics compared to other Doom monsters. Some changes were made to some levels to make it easier on the Game Boy Advance to render. Notably, the chasm in the industrial zone had to be cut in half due to their size, and there's a giant pillar added to the Crusher level to prevent too much from being on screen at any one time. And there are some others that I will note later on. Although it's impressive that the area managed to retain its height, unlike the PS1 version. The PS1 version of Crusher actually had to use a much shorter room to, I guess, compensate for that. Much like the first Doom, corpses also disappear after a few seconds to mitigate performance. Interestingly, the location of the body is spared so that Arch Vials retain their ability to resurrect monsters. It's kind of funny how they seem to come out of thin air, like it's summoning them. One cool thing is the HUD messages pop up in the middle of the Game Boy Advance to compensate for the low resolution so you can actually read it. Of course, another bonus about this is since it's not using Atari Jaguar levels, it actually has the Spider Mastermind and Cyber Demon, so I would recommend it over the original on the Game Boy Advance at least. All in all, it's intact enough that you can still have a good time, but given the abundance of solutions nowadays that can run the full PC version of Doom 2, it's more of a novelty than anything else, just to see how they managed to work around the Game Boy Advance's limitations. This is the part where I would talk about the plot, but Doom 2's plot basically boils down to demons invade Earth, shoot them in the face, reach their leader, shoot it in the face, and you live happily ever after. The Game Boy Advance version is pretty much the same there. So instead, here's the presentation. If there's one thing I find kind of weird about the original Doom for the Game Boy Advance, is that its tracks for its levels skipped up a peg, so you'd be hearing the second level's music on the first and so on. On here, everything's on the correct levels, but a couple of the tracks are replaced. Probably limited cartridge space. Much like the first one, in order to secure a T rating, id Software censored the gore, making it green and removing the ability to gib. I find it funny how, in spite of changing it green, they're just as gory as before, such as the Mancubus falling apart in a gory fashion, exposing its ribs. Apparently, showing gore in a T-rated game is just fine as long as it's, quote, alien gore. The Revenant even keeps its red, bloody appearance, probably because the blood isn't in motion, so there's some plausible deniability there. Now, this also affects the Secret Wolfenstein levels, but they actually handle it a lot better than you would think. Far better than BFG edition. The swastikas and Hitler portraits are replaced with imagery from Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and it fits in well enough. The SS guards aren't even censored, except of course for their blood, which is far better than the BFG version, which just replaces them with zombie men and rips out all the decorations. Talk about lazy, right? One interesting thing to note is the Spectre actually looks more graphically impressive than the PC version because the pixels are apparently brightened instead of darkened, which gives a little water effect. It looks more like its Doom 2016 counterpart than its classic Doom 1. I think it looks awesome. Aside from that, and of course censoring the blood on Doom Guy's face, it's more or less faithful to the original as well as it can be. The lower resolution on the Game Boy Advance makes it look pretty pixelated, especially on a fuller screen video you're probably watching this on right now, and the colors have oddly been brightened up a bit too much, perhaps to compensate for the Game Boy Advance lacking a backlight at the time to make it easier to see. But I was actually pretty impressed on how intact they managed to make everything, considering this is the Game Boy Advance we're talking about. For the limitations of the system, they probably did about as good as they could. Overall, Doom 2 for Game Boy Advance is an interesting little novelty. It can be fun to look back on and just be awed at what they managed to do with such strict limitations, and I can certainly appreciate the appeal of being able to take such a wonderful milestone in gaming history on the road with you. Unfortunately for the game, technology has evolved a lot since then, and we don't have to play such a stripped down version anymore to get our mobile fix. Doom 2 for the Game Boy Advance, it may not hold up well today, but I can certainly say it has its place in gaming history. And as far as older stripped-down ports of Doom are concerned, you could do a lot worse, trust me. Give it a try if you're a Doom maniac or just a history buff who wants to see what the Game Boy Advance was really capable of when they pushed it. If I had to give it a score, I guess 8.4 out of 10. Most of the limitations can be forgiven, but the armor bug, there's just no excuse for that. Still, at its core, it's still Doom 2, which is still a damn bit of fun, especially for its time. As my way of saying thank you for watching this review, here are some differences I noticed in the Doom 2 levels from their PC counterparts, not counting censorship and the like, of course.